So first, what this is about, that's about FaaStRuby. I'm just curious to know, like, if any of you guys have, heard of it before. Yes, that's my first question. Have you guys heard of FaaStRuby before?
There's some shaking.
I can't see anybody or hear anyone. So, so basically, I created this platform. I was just thinking one day about, okay, why aren't there like major cloud providers supporting Ruby? And in fact, today is a big day for Ruby because Amazon announced they have Ruby native support to Lambda, but I'll get there in a sec. But back then, a couple months ago, the only thing you could do is just go for like those platforms that you have to install yourself, like Kubeless or OpenWhisk. So I wanted to build that platform, one, just to learn what's involved in building such platform, and two, I wanted to make it dedicated, to Ruby, basically. So that's how it started. So I'm gonna give you guys a quick demo. I know I don't have much time here. So basically, you start by creating a function. So you go FaaStRuby, new, let's call it hello world. So it creates like a little template, install the gems, and then when I go in
Paulo,
the directory,
bumping the font size just a little bit.
Is it better?
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
All right. So it creates a few files in there. I'm going to show you guys here in the demo folder. Basically, just a little template that I start. It's like a function that says hello world, or if you pass a name as a request body, it will just print that name. So to deploy it, let's go back to my terminal here. I just go FaaStRuby, deploy. Oh, actually, before deploying, I have to create a workspace. FaaStRuby, VanRuby. So it gets credentials from the server, installs in a file for you, and then you can just operate the workspace now. So now you go FaaStRuby, deploy to, because I'm in the folder that contains the function code, VanRuby. So you can see that it runs tests for you. I'm gonna get there, but basically it defaults to fail the deploy if the tests don't pass. So there was a request that came from one of the users. I found it really useful. So anyways, the function is there. So then what I have to do is FaaStRuby, list workspace, VanRuby. So I'm just gonna take a look, see what's in there. So it shows the function hello world and the endpoint. And then if I come here and hopefully the live demo works, if I curl that guy, I get back. Do you guys see here on the corner, hello world? Because there's no new line character, so right here. So anyways, that was a quick function. So now let's try something different here. Let's try to pass some parameters. So do a curl, post. Actually, no, there's something cooler here. FaaStRuby, run the workspace of VanRuby, and I'm gonna say a JSON parameter, a name. I'm gonna say VanRuby. Oh, and I'm gonna close this. And I'm gonna say -- curl, and it should give me the command. Perfect, the curl command that I need to run this. And when I run it, uh-oh. Yeah, that's what I was saying. But right before it's somebody using it really hard. Yeah, so it responded. It took forever, but see, hello VanRuby. Let's try again. Yeah. Oh, that one is slow again. Too bad. I have to upgrade those servers. By the way, this is running on a $5 a month DigitalOcean box. So it's pretty lean. So the next thing I want to show you guys here is I'm going to make a little change here. So let's say instead of hello, I want to say hey. Let's deploy again. I'm going to try to deploy again. Deploy fails because I changed the code, but I didn't change the tests, right? So I have to go there, change the tests, get this guy here to say hey, get this guy here to say hey, and then try again. Hopefully it will work now. Fast. Oh, come on. All right. Deployed. And then if I curled again, man, that's slow. It's ruining the fast reputation. So it says, hey world now. So now I'm gonna show you guys how you can leverage this to create like a little application. So you can just come here, FaaStRuby, new website. And I want a blank template. Okay, so it's there. So just for the sake of speed here, I'm gonna copy and paste some previous code that I had here. I had a template file, an HTML template, and I have the handler here that will take care of that. Boom. So basically, this function handler, you can respond with a hash, an array, or a string, and it will convert for you. And you can pass the headers, and you can pass a custom status code, all those things that you expect. And I just finished an update today, but it's not live yet. But you can also return. You can basically return any valid JSON type. But you can basically return any, in terms of string, you can return anything. Like you can, I have a user that is using that with Puppet, so he has to return YAML. So he just passes the content type YAML. There is another guy that's returning JavaScript for some reason. So let's see, hopefully this is gonna work. Oh, wrong window again. So I'm gonna go here on website, FaaStRuby, deploy to VanRuby. You see the test pass because there are no tests. I created a blank template, that's why. And then I'm gonna list it again. And I'll get the URL here for the website, and hopefully when I open it here, I open it here, it should load the website. Oh, come on. What's going on here? Sorry guys, I just broke the live demo rule. All right, so the website I created is just a little button that will, just a little button and a shameless jQuery here that will that will tap the URL that I created previously, the hello world, and just fetch whatever's in there. So it prints the execution time. See, this is a little bit high. Like usually it's not like that. I don't know, there's something going on. But this usually runs in, you know, about, yeah, there's something wrong here. But it runs in less than a millisecond. That's weird. Anyways, so yeah, so that was basically it that I had for a demo. The platform does much more. You can, for example, you can come here, you can schedule something, like you can say schedule and then create job 1, and then when every 2 hours, and then you can pass the an optional body, you know, what you want to have in the body. You can pass query params, and you can pass headers. And once you deploy that function, it just creates a cron job in the background, and it will run that function periodically for you. The other thing that it does is that if you, oh, by the way, I didn't mention, but you can use jams. You can come here and just do a require Redis, and you could just go to gem file, gem Redis, and when you deploy, it should install Redis for you. And one thing that users ask me is a way to store secrets. So there is a way through the execution context. So you can come here and say FaaStRuby update context, and then you have to pass the workspace VanRuby for this function, and then you say -d, and then you say, I don't know, password super secret. And when you run this, you're gonna store, it stores in the database, but it's encrypted at rest. So there's no risk of this leaking in any way. And when you are on your function, you can just call this, like, you can retrieve this like the secret. You can do a JSON.parse event context, because whatever you put in the context just comes as like raw string. Oh, sorry about that. And then you can come password, whatever you did, and then then you can create like a Redis, you know, like the new host, blah blah, password. And once you deploy it, you'll just connect to Redis. And people use that for counters, and because so far there's no way to persist state for every function run. The only really way to do that is through external databases. Like if you get a Redis cloud account, for example, you can persist like that. But I was talking to the Redis labs guys, and they said I'm allowed to just put up Redis instances for the users, and they are not going to come after me for that. So that's probably what I'm going to do, like Heroku style, you know, let you deploy your own Redis inside of the FaaStRuby infrastructure, because talking to Redis cloud it just takes too much time.
That's really cool. Thanks so much, Paulo. I think we should probably wrap it up for the next one, but feel free to wrap it up.
Yeah, no, that was just it, guys. So if you want to check it out, it's FaaStRuby.io. And I'm open to lots of suggestions. What do you guys think about it? Just give me a shout.
Nice, thank you.
So I've got a table of data here, and this is about as generic as I could think of, just coming up with some columns that mean absolutely nothing. And what this is about is, say you want to sort the data in some way that, you know, perhaps by priority first, but then if the priority is the same, then you want to go to some other thing to determine what to sort by next. So kind of a ranked order way of sorting things. Who knows what this is called? Who's used it before? So this is the spaceship operator in Ruby. And what it does for you is it gives you a way of telling you whether the number on the left is less than, equal, or greater than the number on the right. And it'll return you one of these three values. So the way it works is basically you type in 1 spaceship 2 and it'll tell you -1. If you type it the other way, it'll tell you 1. And if you give the same value on both sides, then the answer is 0. That's all it does. It's really, really simple. Now, this is built into basic Ruby core objects, but you can add this to your own classes as well. So if I had a row for my data and I defined this for myself and I wanted to sort by the level, I could just define it like this. And as this returns a value, Ruby can use that for sorting. As a bonus, if you include comparable into your class, you also get all the comparable methods in there, which are the less than, greater than, and all of those other ones, a few others as well, but basically it just gives you this as a bonus for free. So that's how Spaceships works, but how does it sort our data? So I'm just going to extract what we had in that method into a separate method here called by level for that part, because we want to sort by multiple things all at once. So if I extract this like that, and then what we also need to do is apply a little bit of magic here. So there's a method called non-zero, and this is pretty obvious in terms of what it does, but it's a bit different than you might expect a question mark method would be in Ruby. It returns either the number, but not zero. It'll return a nil. So if you say 1.non-zero, you get 1. You say 0 non-zero, you get nil. Now, the thing about this is that these values are, the number that you get is truthy and the nil is falsy. So you can use that for combining different things together. So if we add non-zero to our level method there, and then we can do this by level or by priority or by quantity or finally by created at. It's important that the last one returns a 0 because the other ones don't. So I just wrote it that way. So now if you go back to your data, you can think about how you can structure these sorting operations for yourself. And you can use more complex ways of combining them. And so then when you get your data into a set, you can just sort it, and Ruby will do that for you. So if you have an array of rows, that's your data, you can apply sort to it. You can get the last item from the list just by using max or min. And that's it. Thanks, everyone.
All right, so the title of my talk is called Keep Ruby's Standard Library Weird. So I don't know how many people have seen this, but Bundler is getting merged into Ruby core, which is super exciting. And when I saw that, I started thinking like it's kind of awesome to see all this stuff in the Ruby ecosystem slowly kind of converge into the standard library. It's like really great to see. I think it's what makes Ruby great in a lot of ways. But I started to wonder, what else is there? Like what kind of stuff is just in the standard library that we don't maybe see or pay attention to every day? So I decided to find out. I basically just went to the standard library documentation and looked down the left-hand side to see, stuff I didn't recognize, things that, sounded a bit weird at first glance. And I went on a kind of weird and wonderful adventure. So I'm going to share some of the highlights that I found. So it's demo time. First up, we've got shell words. So this is actually pretty cool, pretty useful, especially if you do a lot of work with shell integration. So Ruby provides some easy ways of working with values that you need to pass into the shell or get back. So to take an example, let's say I have a file name with an apostrophe in it. If I just pass that to, if I use the little backticks to execute a shell command, and I pass that to cat, and I want to like see the contents of the file, it's going to blow up at me because bash is going to come across that single quote, unescaped quote, and it's like, I don't know what you're talking about. What is this? But if we use shell escape, it'll escape it for us, and then we get the contents back, and you're good from there. Although you might want to have a conversation about whoever added an apostrophe into the file name. So next up, yes, Ruby supports English. This library is actually kind of, I feel like in a lot of ways is like the epitome of what makes Ruby great in the first place, is that it takes the kind of first tenet of the language is making a language that's readable by humans first and computers second. So who knows what this $$ sign does? Yeah, gets the process ID. That's a holdover from Perl. which Ruby is heavily influenced by. But the English library in Ruby provides $process ID, which is much more explicit and easier to grok as a human. And there's a bunch of this. So if you want to get the exit status of a shell command that you just ran, you can use $, or you could use child status. So next up, we've got prime. So yes, Ruby can tell you when numbers are prime. You can either use the prime.prime method directly, or this module is mixed into integers by default, so you can just ask a number if it's prime. Pretty straightforward. But did you know that there are 2 ways in Ruby of determining if a number is prime? The first one is trial division, which is basically just like a brute force method of figuring out if a number is prime. And the second is the Eratosthenes method, which predictably was invented by a Greek mathematician about 2,200 years ago. And you can use both of them thanks to Ruby. And interestingly, if you benchmark both of them, it's pretty obvious that the trial division one is pretty slow, and the Eratosthenes one is pretty fast, which I think would make them quite happy. Okay, this is probably one of my favorites. This is abrev. And it does exactly what it says on the tin. Calculate the set of unique abbreviations for a given set of strings. So if you have the strings Vancouver and VanRuby, and you want a way to unambiguously refer to one of them, you can't use V, because they both start with V. You can't use VA. You can't use VAN. You have to get a bit more specific. So abbreviation, or abrev, will basically take an array of strings and return this hash where all the keys are ways of unambiguously referring to the word that the value stores. So you get this crazy looking hash. It's kind of cool. So I was trying to come up with like a use case for this. And the one I came up with was like a unambiguous nickname generator. So if I'm hanging out with my A friends and we want a way of like easily referring to each other without getting confused, I could use abrev. So I could put their names into an array. I could, from that crazy hash array we got, I could get the keys out of that and maybe filter the ones that are more than 2 characters just to make nicknames better. And then I get unambiguous nicknames out of that. So feel free to call me Ale from now on. Okay, last but not least. So I'm sure people have used this all the time, right? HTTP. How many people have used net pop3? Yes, you can check your email from Ruby, which is like super weird, but I think it's amazing. So I actually, when I found this, I actually tried it. I had to go and set up something special for my Gmail to do this, but it actually worked. So you can basically set up a new instance of pop3 where you just pass out your mail server. Then you just call start with your username and password. And then you can basically iterate through your new email that you've gotten. And on that, you basically get, each email is just a huge string with all the headers and the body and the subject all in there. So you have to like do a bunch of string manipulation, but you can read your email within Ruby, which is pretty sweet. So yeah, I think this whole kind of traversing the standard library just made me love Ruby even more. Like it's got all these funny, weird quirks that somebody thought was useful at one point, made its way into the standard library, and maybe it's still useful. Maybe it's not, but I think the quirks are what makes it really great. So thanks, everybody.
So today I would like to talk about RCurtain. First, on my last company, my last experience, sorry, we have a problem about like feature flags. So pretty much like we want to deploy something new, and if something goes wrong, we need to roll back. So we start using feature flags. Feature flags pretty much like, so our first idea was pretty much like add an if there, checking the database, something like this. And that's like not that nice, right? I think that everyone like may have this kind of problem one day. So we started to think about like a better way to do this, and we created a lib called RCurtain. So what was the idea? First, we like to deploy new features easily. So we like to deploy new features without need to roll back if something goes wrong. So let's say, for example, that we want to, I don't know, like release, we have a web application and we just want to change like a button, like the side of the button, something like this, and we don't want to roll back something goes wrong. Or we have an API that now is doing like something new, and we don't want like to deploy the whole new version and roll it back if something goes wrong. So the idea was pretty much like writing something that makes it easier to control feature flags. And the main idea was like, we need to make it easier in the way that like, if we use the database, for example, we have, for example, customer success. They are not like developers, and they usually don't go like, they don't have like write permissions to the database. So we would like to make it easier for them to control the feature as well. So first, we created RCurtain. So what is RCurtain? It's pretty much a gem. It's open source. And the idea was like, using Redis, we create a key for a feature, and we define two things: a percentage and users. Users, so percentage. Percentage is a value from 0 to 100, where every time that you want to check the feature, it will try to get the random number, and will check if it's greater or you check if it is lower than the percent that you enabled. And users is pretty much a list of params that you can enable. I can show you like later. And it is pretty simple. So everything you need to do is create an initializer specifying the Redis. And the use is pretty much like this. So instead of adding like a lot of ifs, we just ask like RCurtain. So the idea was like check like if the curtain is open or not. So just say RCurtain, the name of the feature, and you can pass like multiple arguments like an array of users and say, hey, those users are enabled for that. So we first created this one. Well, it was like the first idea, but as I told you, like we like to make customer success able to manage this one. So we created, so this is in Ruby. We also have a Java version for this one, but this one's Ruby. We then created a graphical user interface for them, also open source. We call ifman. So ifman is pretty much like anyone can go there in ifman, and it just like log into Redis and managing your features. So, I mean, the idea is pretty simple. Like it's really, really simple. We just would like to make like something that makes our lives easier. I have a small demo here that might make it easier to understand. So I just created like a Rails application, like a really, really simple Rails application. And I have a button in my Rails application. And so I'm using Docker to make my life easier here. So this is my Rails application. I will also spin up ifman. So I'll be running my Rails application and ifman as well. I have Redis and Postgres running. So it's all running here. So it's really simple, okay? So I have like my application running here, and I can add something here. And the idea is like, I have this version production. And this is like in the web, but we can add this in the backend as well. So, yeah, right here. So in my controller, I just like defining a variable, like checking if a feature called grocery button is open. And if it is open, I just like assign this to a variable. And in my front end, I was just checking like, hey, if this feature is open, show this. If not, show that. So the idea was like, I have this version running in production, and we can go to ifman, which is our graphical user interface. It's pretty simple. You just have to type your Redis URL and your Redis password. This one's locally, so just Redis. And so I already created my feature here. So the idea was like, I have my application running here. It's showing like this button. And the idea is like, I could go here and say, hey, let's enable that feature. So now everyone will be able to see it. So I go here in percentage and say, hey, enable 100%. And when I refresh, I should just see like the new button. So the idea was like, the main idea was like, we would like to deliver features, but we would not like to deliver like features that if something goes wrong, we need to roll back everything. Oops. So we used this both in the front end and in the back end. So for example, we started to create a new like strategy to cache, for example, in my last company. And for the user was like, nothing's really changed for user, but in the back end, a lot of things changed. So to make things like goals, like in a way that we could like see what is happening, we use it percentage. So we start enable like 10%. So every time that someone was hitting like the cache, 10% of the time, it was using the new strategy. Then we enable 20, then 30, then 40, then 100. The idea is that once we enable 100, it should just go there and remove the if. So, and we also have users. So if we want to create a feature specific for a user, or, I mean, it's user, but it's actually a string, so you can pass whatever you want. So for example, if someone's log in and you want to use their email, you can just put their email here, and only that user should be able to see that. So the idea was like, it's just like a simple like lib that you can just plug in your project and just control your features. You don't need like to roll back anything. It's already in production, and that's it. Oh, they're also both open source. So if anyone else wants to help, and that's it. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot, Gabriel. That was great. Any questions for Gabriel?
Hello, my name is Gabriela. I'm going to talk a little bit about the shared examples. It's a feature on RSpec. I'm not sure if everyone knows about RSpec, but if you ever did something in Ruby and tried to test it, is the most basic gem for testing. So I'm gonna talk about a little bit of these shared examples. It's pretty simple, but I've worked about 3 years with Ruby, and I just started using it. I'm not sure if how many people use that already or not, but I think it's great, and well, that's what I'm talking about. Here I have an example of a simple coffee that can have both espresso, steamed milk, foam milk, and chocolate. And the most basic one is a mochaccino, which have all of them. And in here, I created a shared example. The shared example is testing all of those things. The subject needs to have the espresso, the steamed milk, the foam milk, and the chocolate. Need all of those to be true. In here, in my context, I just called the shared example with it behaves like, and the word I gave in here, a normal coffee. But okay, what if I want to, what if I want to add more types of coffee, like a espresso, a cappuccino, mocha? Espresso only have the espresso, the cappuccino don't have chocolate, while the mocha don't have foam milk. Do I need to create one shared example for each of them? If I do need to do that, there's no need to create a shared example because it will not be shared. So I can add those conditions in here. And in the shared example, I can add an if for each one of them. This way, I can just call. Then here, like it behaves when plain espresso, it behaves like a normal coffee. What the steamed milk is false, foam milk is false, and chocolate is false. So I'm only going to call this one here. With the cappuccino, the chocolate's false, and the mocha, the foam milk's false. So this way I can dry up a little bit of my test, not calling all those examples in each one of them. And I just can still use the shared example for each one of them. If you want just to see it here. And that's basically it.
So I'm doing something really bold here. I'm doing a presentation without a laptop, which means I don't get to hide behind the counter there. I've just kind of made this up on the spot. It's something I ran across that I thought was pretty interesting and worth sharing in the group because Googling didn't turn up an answer. So who here uses Postgres? okay, a few of you. What if I could say to you that you're wasting a huge amount of memory when you're using Postgres? Would you be interested in hearing about how I can save you a lot of memory? Okay, I'm gonna tell you a little story here about how I discovered Postgres was eating a lot of memory for the company I work for, which is Jane. Jane does clinic management software, charting, scheduling, billing, insurance, and payments. Yeah, so we've got a pretty traditional architecture, load balancers, web servers, database servers. We run Postgres in the back end. We use a feature called schemas or schema search paths. And this is how we partition our customer data. Are people here familiar with schemas? Anyone? Got a couple nodding heads, one thumbs up, okay. I question the relevance of this talk. And we run, on our web servers, we run Passenger. And we use a feature in Passenger, a configuration option in Passenger, which says, and I'm talking fast because I'm trying to fit inside the 6 minutes. Also, I'm immensely nervous. So we use an option that says that if the process exceeds 700 megabytes, when the request is finished, Passenger will recycle the process for us. But we have a problem. And the problem was that maybe once a month, maybe every couple months, one of our database servers would run out of memory. I'd go on the server and I'd look at the process list and I'd see, you know, this process is using 23% of our memory. This process is using 22% of our memory. What the heck? So I did the obvious thing. I looked at our configuration options and made sure I didn't lie about how much memory our servers had. I read through all the things about memory I could find. I did all sorts of experiments and I couldn't figure it out. So I did what many people in startups do. I forgot about the problem. So we decided that we like things to go faster, so we were going to upgrade a point release of Ruby. I won't say what version to save myself some embarrassment, but we upgraded to a newer version than we were on before, and it promised better performance and better memory efficiency, and so we were pretty stoked about that. So we rolled it out in production, and the first day was awesome. Memory usage was down 15% across the board. Response times were 10% better. I mean, that's exactly what Ruby promised, and we got it. The problem started on the second day. So on the second day, we had that same database problem again. Database ran out of memory. There's no active queries, nothing funny going on, just out of memory. So I killed the processes safely, and things went back to normal. And I thought, I really hope there's no correlation here. Well, sure enough, day 3, we had the same problem again. Day 4, we had the same problem again. Day 5, we had the same problem again, and so on. And I thought, well, what the heck? What does upgrading Ruby have to do with our database server? I mean, all Ruby's doing is generating SQL and emitting it over the wire, right? I couldn't figure it out. But the one thing I noticed was that 15% improvement in memory usage actually did something I didn't expect. So the irony here is that our improvement in memory efficiency actually caused a big problem for us. So we never crossed that 700 megabyte threshold. That 15% improvement in memory efficiency meant that Passenger wasn't recycling the processes. And so because the processes weren't being recycled, the connections weren't being recycled. And so where before we'd have connections that would be open for maybe a couple hours at a time, we now had these connections that were open for days or weeks if we didn't do a deploy for that long, because our code is awesome and Ruby's awesome. So there's definitely a correlation here and I couldn't figure it out. So I did a bunch of experiments, like a lot of experiments, and they all failed until I did one that succeeded. So my theory was that there is a non-trivial cost in memory to just visiting a table in Postgres. And so my experiment was this. I made a database with 100 tables, 1,000 tables, 10,000 tables, 100,000 tables, 500,000 tables, and I would connect to it and measure the amount of memory usage. Of course, just connecting, it didn't trigger the problem. But what I did was when I say visit the table, that means I just do some operation on the table. So in this case, it was just getting a count of rows from the table, which in this case was always 0. But when I visited the 100 tables, the 1,000 tables, and so on, there was a correlation in the memory usage on the Postgres side. And it worked out to be, I think, like 200 kilobytes per table that you visit, which is non-trivial. I mean, if you've got a traditional app with 100 tables and you're not using schemas to partition your data, it doesn't matter. But our architecture was every customer's in their own schema because it's medical information and they don't really like us sharing stuff back and forth. So we'd end up with 1,000 customers times the number of tables in our app. And the math I did said, we need to upgrade our database servers from having 64 gigabytes of RAM to 64 terabytes of RAM, which is insane. So obviously we didn't have the budget for those boxes. So I had to find, I had to find another solution. I just added some connection recycling middleware. So really simple, just like every 1,000 requests in our Sidekick, every 1,000 requests in our web app, it just says, hey, I'm done with this connection. Can you close it and give me another one? And that solved the problem. So in summary, if you run Postgres, you should check out how you're managing your connections because you might be giving away a non-trivial amount of memory to Postgres. And that's all memory that can't be used by Postgres for caching and speeding up your queries and everything. So yeah, that's it. I could not find anything about this by Googling. I don't even know what you'd Google to find that. But yeah, if you've got an architecture similar to ours, you're probably leaking memory.
Hello, everybody. Can I start by asking a couple questions? Who writes tests? Who likes fast tests? Who writes tests with RSpec? Who writes tests with mini-test? There's an inconsistency here. Anyways, that's a distraction. I'm here to talk about tautological tests, testing anti-pattern that I learned through a dramatic issue on the mini-test open source project. So a tautology is true in every possible interpretation. You may also understand it as redundancy, like the beginner approached the task with fresh eyes. There's some redundancy in there. He's a beginner and it's a new task, of course it's going to be fresh. But in testing, it's where you make an expectation based on the same implementation as your method under test. So here we see entering into the anti-pattern of the testing tautology by asserting that 5 plus 3 is equal to the sum of 5 and 3. Now in this case, it's subtle, but the fix is easy. You make it equivalent to 8. Now, where else can this show up? Here's going to be another interactive session. It can, oh, wow, what happened to the, there's another slide here. Here we are. Where else can it show up? It can show up in helpers. Say you use the same date formatting helper in your assertion as in your implementation. But does this idea, this new idea, ring any bells with anyone? Does anyone have any suspicions somewhere in their code they might have a tautological test? Any brave souls want to offer? Maybe maybe tests that use doubles. Anyone use any test doubles? Anyone use any factories or fixtures in their tests? And do you use them to create state and check expectations? I'd watch out for that. Fixtures, factories. The referenced blog post here has a lot of, has a lot of information about tautological tests, and it really opened up a new way of thinking about tests. Can anyone differentiate the Chicago school from the London school of testing? It's a fascinating dichotomy. In any case, thanks for listening to a little talk about tautological tests.
Thank you, Caleb. Does anyone have any questions or queries for Caleb? I tried to sneak a tautology in there.
One favors mocks and the other doesn't. I'll leave it to you to find out which is which. I mean, which one's right? I mean, I guess it depends on what you know about your system, what you're trying to test, and the value you're trying to deliver. I heard a story earlier about a test suite that uses a lot of mocks and doubles, and they didn't have a lot of confidence that it tested what was needed. And so reading more about tautological tests, they suggest not using tests for helpers, or not using doubles for helpers, but for collaborators. And that's the distinction between those, maybe a longer talk. Thanks. Any other questions? Jason. Okay, yeah, sure. Sure, I'll just bring up the issue real quick. GitHub/Seattle RB. Seattle RB is a prolific contributor to open source. They're a Ruby group, a brigade, that meets and writes code. And one of these issues, I think if it's not issue 666, it's referenced in issue 666. Yeah, this is all about a change that they shipped that would fail cert equals when the expectation was nil. And so you have some method under test, and you make an assertion that says you expect it to equal some variable. But as your test runs, that variable ends up being nil. So somewhere in your system, you have an unexpected nil, maybe an unexpected. And so the Seattle RB team expressed the opinion that that should fail. And so if you wrote an assertion where you expected a certain value and the expectation was a nil, then they fail it and say you need to use assert nil. You need to be deliberate in your checking for nil, rather than accidentally have a nil go through and then a surprising behavior that you may not have expected ends up passing tautologically, true under any condition. If you pass a nil through a format date time, you get a nil out, but is that what you were expecting? So this caused like quite a lot of commotion. A lot of people saying how it's causing an onerous amount of work and it's really inappropriate to express these opinions. Tenderlove weighed in with some sage thoughts, but he definitely made a point pretty clear. It found a lot of falsely passing tests in the GitHub code base. And the reason why I know about this issue is because I've been trying to figure out how to contribute to Minitest, because the release of Minitest 6 has stalled, and there's a lot of open issues that haven't received much attention, pull requests which haven't been merged. And so I'm trying to read first and commit second. And that's how I found out about tautological tests. And that was the dramatic issue you asked about. Is there any other questions? If you want to test, the question was, if you want to test something that uses the database and you can't use mock objects, what should you use? And I guess, I mean, you could use the database. Sure, yeah. And you could have each example run in a transaction. That is configurable with RSpec, or no, that is configurable with Rails in Spec Helper pretty easily with the Rails ties helpers. Any other questions? All right, well, thanks for listening.
Thank you.